In December 2024, the Rhode Island Community Food Bank stopped buying eggs, not because they didn't need them, because a case of eggs that cost $16.50 in June had ballooned to $61.50 by December, a 273% increase in 6 months. They couldn't afford to feed hungry people eggs anymore. In New York City, a dozen eggs hit $10. Waffle House, added a 50-cent surcharge per egg. A Pittsburgh bakery owner watched her pre-beaten egg costs surge 345% in 13 months. She said, "You almost feel defeated." The official explanation from the government, from the news, from the egg industry? Bird flu, a disease wiping out flocks and creating a shortage. That's the story you were told. Here's what they didn't tell you. One company, a single egg producer in Mississippi, made $1.2 billion in profit last year. In one quarter alone, their gross profit was $716 million. The same company had made $161 million profit in all of 2021. And 3 weeks after the Department of Justice announced a criminal investigation into egg pricing, prices dropped 60%. Not because the bird flu suddenly disappeared, because someone started asking questions. Cal-Maine Foods, based in Ridgeland, Mississippi. You've probably never heard of them. You've almost certainly eaten their eggs. Cal-Maine is the single largest egg producer and distributor in the United States. They control roughly 20% of the entire American egg market. The top 5 egg producers together own approximately half of all laying hens in the country. This is not a competitive market. It is a market dominated by a handful of companies at the top of a supply chain that 340 million Americans depend on every single week. Cal-Maine was founded in 1957 and has been a family-controlled company for most of its history. The founding family held special Class A super voting shares, giving them control over the company regardless of what other shareholders wanted. In April 2025, right as the Department of Justice investigation was intensifying, the company converted those shares to common stock and the family sold off their position. Cal-Maine then repurchased $50 million of those shares back. The CEO is Sherman Miller. In fiscal year 2025, the year egg prices hit record highs and food banks stopped being able to afford eggs, Cal-Maine paid out over $170 million in dividends to shareholders. The company's stock price tripled between 2021 and 2025, while families were rationing eggs. Here's something almost no one knows. 95% of commercial egg contracts in the United States are not priced by individual negotiation. They are pegged to a single benchmark published by a private company called Urner Barry. Urner Barry is a commodity pricing service. Every day they publish a price for eggs. Grocery chains, food manufacturers, restaurants, almost everyone buying eggs at scale pays a price tied to whatever Urner Barry says eggs are worth that day. So how does Urner Barry calculate that number? They survey transactions in something called the Egg Clearinghouse, a spot market where producers sell excess eggs. Here's the problem. The Egg Clearinghouse only represents about 5% of all egg transactions, and it is dominated by the largest producers, the Big Five. According to federal lawsuits filed in 2025, producers allegedly fed inflated price data into the clearinghouse. Because the clearinghouse set the Urner Barry benchmark, and the benchmark set the price for 95% of the market. A feedback loop. A small, manipulated pool of transactions flowing upward to set prices for the entire country. The lawsuits allege the Big Five use this mechanism, combined with deliberately stagnant production, to engineer a price spike that lasted years. And here's the part that matters. Cal-Maine and its allies had done this exact thing before. Between 2004 and 2008, egg producers in the United States ran a coordinated scheme to restrict the supply of eggs and inflate prices. The mechanism was called an Animal Welfare Program, a code of conduct that required producers to reduce flock sizes. On paper, it sounded like an ethical initiative. In practice, federal courts later found it was a supply restriction scheme designed to keep prices artificially high. The companies involved included Cal-Maine Foods and Rose Acre Farms, the same companies at the center of the current investigation. In November 2023, More than 15 years after the original scheme, a federal jury delivered its verdict. The producers had conspired. Damages were set at $17.7 million. Under antitrust law, those damages were automatically tripled. The final judgment: $53.1 million. Companies like Kraft, Kellogg's, General Mills, and Nestlé, the companies who had been overcharged, received portions of that award. Cal-Maine paid a portion of that judgment. Then, within months, egg prices began climbing again. The DOJ is now investigating whether the same companies ran the same playbook a second time, this time using bird flu as the cover story instead of an animal welfare program. A $53 million penalty. And they allegedly did it again anyway. The bird flu was real. Avian influenza did kill tens of millions of birds. That part of the story is true. But here's what the data shows. In 2022, the effective reduction in the laying hen flock compared to 2021 was approximately 1%. 1% fewer hens. Wholesale egg prices rose 127% that same year. That is not a supply and demand relationship. That is a pricing decision. To put it in perspective, during the 2015 bird flu outbreak, which was actually more severe in terms of birds lost, producers replaced their flocks and fully recovered within 8 months. This time, 2 years passed with no recovery. According to filings from Farm Action, a nonprofit agricultural advocacy group, Cal-Maine kept its production essentially flat at approximately 1.1 billion dozen eggs per year from 2021 through 2024, even as it recorded the highest profits in its history. Instead of expanding supply to meet demand, the Big Five used their record profits to acquire competitors. Cal-Maine alone completed 6 acquisitions in 2023. More market control, less competition. Prices 3 to 4 times higher than the supply reduction could justify, according to economists and class action lawyers. And then came the moment that revealed everything. On March 7, 2025, Politico reported that the Department of Justice had opened a criminal investigation into egg pricing. Egg prices had been at record highs. They began falling, and kept falling, until wholesale farm-level prices were 86% lower a year later. The bird flu didn't go away. The investigation arrived. In January 2025, 50 million Americans relied on food banks. The Rhode Island Community Food Bank had been buying eggs for years, a reliable, affordable protein for people who had nothing else. In December 2024, they stopped. The cost had gone from $16.50 per case to $61.50. A 373% increase in 6 months. Director of Community Partnerships, Charles Robbins said, "We will likely not have eggs on the shopping list for our agencies until the cost goes down some." In New York City, City Harvest, which distributes food to over 650 food programs, completely paused all egg purchasing. In Pittsburgh, the owner of Grandview Bakery watched her pre-beaten egg costs surge 345% between January 2024 and February 2025. She said, "When something goes up this drastically, this quickly, there's not a whole lot we can do except eat the cost. You almost feel defeated." At Bread Belly in San Francisco, egg costs rose 150% in 4 months. They removed their signature egg coffee from the menu. At Ursula in Brooklyn, eggs went from $45 for 15 dozen to between $102 and $170 for the same amount. At Daisy's in Chicago, a single egg cost 9 cents in 2021. By 2025, it cost 60 cents. Meanwhile, in the fiscal quarter ending February 2025, Cal-Maine Foods posted a gross profit of $716 million. On March 7, 2025, Politico reported that the Department of Justice had opened a criminal antitrust investigation into major egg producers. Cal-Maine released a statement saying it was cooperating. The investigation was the result of years of pressure. Farm Action, a nonprofit focused on agricultural consolidation, had been sounding the alarm since 2022, writing letters to the FTC and DOJ documenting the pricing patterns and the concentration of market power. In May 2025, Senators Elizabeth Warren and J.D. Banks, a Democrat and a Republican, sent a joint letter to the DOJ and FTC. They wrote, "The sustained increase in egg prices has placed a significant financial strain on American families, particularly working-class households. We are concerned that record-high egg prices reflect non-competitive behavior among large producers." The same month, class action lawsuits began piling into federal courts in Indiana and Illinois. The cases were eventually consolidated in the Western District of Wisconsin before Chief Judge James Peterson. Named defendants in the class actions: Cal-Maine Foods, Rose Acre Farms, Hillendale Farms, Daybreak Foods, Versova Holdings, and Urner Barry itself, the benchmark pricing service. The alleged conspiracy period, 2022 through March 2025. The alleged mechanism, feeding inflated data into the Egg Clearinghouse to manipulate the Urner Barry benchmark and keep prices artificially elevated across 95% of the U.S. egg market. Multiple cases are actively proceeding. The DOJ investigation is ongoing. As of early 2026, no criminal charges have been filed. But the investigation has not been closed. In January 2026, a dozen eggs cost $2.52. That's down from $6.23 in March 2025, a 60% drop. The bird flu didn't go away. The DOJ arrived. That price drop is either a remarkable coincidence, or it is evidence of exactly what the lawsuits allege: a market controlled by a handful of companies, pricing not according to supply and demand, but according to what they could get away with. Cal-Maine Foods made $1.2 billion in profit in fiscal year 2025. In one quarter, they made more than 7 times what the entire company made in all of 2021. And the $53 million penalty from the last time they were found guilty of price fixing? That was less than 4.5% of what they made in a single quarter at the height of this alleged scheme. When the penalty for breaking the rules is smaller than the profit from breaking the rules are not a deterrent. They are a cost of doing business. 50 million Americans depend on food banks. Food banks stopped buying eggs because a handful of companies allegedly decided their shareholders mattered more. The Department of Justice is still investigating. The class action lawsuits are still proceeding. What happens next depends on whether prosecutors are willing to hold companies, not just pay settlements, actually accountable. We've been here before, with the same companies. In 2023, they were found guilty. In 2025, they allegedly did it again. An egg is not a luxury. It is the cheapest protein available to the people who can afford the least. And someone decided to make it a profit center. Quick note: everything in this video comes from court records, federal lawsuits, government documents, and published investigative reporting. All sources are linked in the description below. This is for educational purposes. Draw your own conclusions. If this made you angry, it should. Share this with someone who asked why eggs were so expensive and accepted the bird flu answer. The DOJ investigation is still open. The class action lawsuits are still in federal court. If you want to follow what happens, the case is in the Western District of Wisconsin. It's public record. And if you want to understand the next invisible system quietly extracting money from people who have no choice, subscribe. There's no shortage of stories. We're just getting started.